you ask most people what Australia's good at, the answer that they will come up with is sport. And most people will be able to tell you who several Australian sporting heroes are. That's true, but we're also really good at medical research, and fewer people know about that. So I'm going to talk to you today about 3 medical research heroes and their stories. We're really good at medical research in Australia, and the government at different levels spends about $5 billion, which is about $225 for every Australian on medical research. And this is some of the results. So if we take scientific output, divide by GDP, the size of the economy, Australia is actually second best in the world, which is a pretty outstanding result. So we're really good at that. And the interesting thing is, what do we do with that? What's the product that we can get out of that? It's interesting to look at Massachusetts, where I went on my Fulbright Fellowship, and with 7 million people and $2.4 billion of government research funding, excellent universities, excellent hospitals, what have they created? So The Economist describes Massachusetts as the preeminent biotechnology hub in the world. That $2.4 billion of government funding has generated 80,000 jobs on an ongoing basis, and lots of money flows in. There were 13 NASDAQ IPOs last year, billions of dollars of venture capital funding and public company funding. And on the health side, 445 new medical products in development in clinical trials. And the FDA approves between 20 and 40 new drugs every year. 8 of the drugs in 2016 came out of Massachusetts. So that's an incredible global health impact. So I am a venture capital investor just focused on life sciences and over Australian life sciences. And over the last 20 years, I've looked at thousands of Australian life science companies. And we've got a lot of things right here. So our researchers are good. They've been good for a long time. We've been doing medical research in this country for 100 years. So there have been generations of excellent medical researchers, 5 Nobel Prizes in medicine, and then the hospitals are really good, the doctors are really good. These incredible facilities where we are meeting today are an example of the sort of infrastructure that's available to develop our medical research. Our regulator is a very favourable regulator, very helpful to getting new products into patients and trying them. So we have 1,000 clinical trials done every year in Australia. A lot of those clinical trials are actually of drugs that were developed elsewhere, but we have the ability to do that. And our tax system, our government also provides a lot of support with tax incentives to do R&D, including clinical trials. So most of the pieces are in place to have a thriving biotech industry. There are 470 companies, which is not bad, but somehow we haven't nailed it. We're not Massachusetts, even though a lot of the pieces are in place. And I think the place that it breaks down, the bottleneck, is right at the beginning, getting the research out of the universities and medical research institutes and into the clinic. So lost in translation, patents issued per 100 million in research. Again, Australia's the red bar. We're horrible at that. We don't do nearly as much patenting as the US, Great Britain and Canada for our research expenditure. And spinning companies out, startup companies per $100 million of research expenditure, also pretty ordinary, frankly. So the reason for that, I think, is twofold. One is that the incentives are not right, and secondly, that the culture is not quite right. So if you are a medical researcher, the most prestigious source of research funding in this country is the National Health and Medical Research Council. Last year, they made $820 million of grants, and this is a bar chart which shows you where that went. So the red bar is medical research which is directed at patient outcomes, and it's tiny, it's $30 million. And the yellow bar, $15 million, is what is research that is directed towards commercial outcomes. So if you are a medical researcher and you want to get ahead, are you going to focus on those tiny little bits at the top, or are you going to go for the part of medical research which really rewards you for publishing papers? If you are a doctor, you are funded for treating patients and not for doing medical research. So the funding system doesn't really push us towards having an industry and health outcomes as it might do. So that's an opportunity for government. And there's also an opportunity for citizens, which is that we should celebrate the people who do it well, who get the products out of the research institutes, out of the universities, and into patients, changing health outcomes, and into developing an industry. Priscilla Kincaid Smith is my first Australian medical research hero. She was the first woman professor at the University of Melbourne, and I don't know if you are familiar with the expression, but last century, if you were feeling stressed, Bex was marketed to you with the banner, "Feeling stressed? Have a cup of tea, a Bex and a lie down." And it became a bit of a joke. My husband says it to me when I'm a little bit stressed. Priscilla Kincaid Smith worked out that following that advice was irreversibly poisoning your kidneys. As one of the ingredients in Bex, phenacetin, was actually destroying your kidneys. So she worked that out. That's the medical research piece. Pretty good deduction. But she then went on to lobby government tirelessly until Bex was banned. And the use of painkillers was reduced. And as a result of that work, the translation work, we have not got an epidemic of people with kidney damage on dialysis. My next medical research hero is Marie Smith, also not a relative of mine, also a Smith. And her innovation was to discover a drug for neuropathic pain. The way Marie describes neuropathic pain is the incredible intense pain of a toothache, but in your leg, with no apparent cause. So it's nerve pain. And Marie developed this drug, spun it out from the University of Queensland into a company called Spinifex, which my firm invested in. And in 2015, that company was sold as one of the biggest exits from the venture capital industry that Australia has ever seen, thereby creating a path to show that you can make money. And it's a smart investment to invest in translating medical research. And Marie believes that you shouldn't do medical research unless you are going to translate it into medicines for patients and make a difference in the world. Third medical hero, is Sandra Anderson, who had the insight that if you take mannitol, a naturally occurring sugar, turn it into tiny, tiny little particles that you can breathe deep into your lungs, you have a tool which you can use to diagnose asthma, optimise treatment of asthma, and treat lung diseases like cystic fibrosis, enabling you to bring the mucus out of your lungs. Sandra licensed that work to a company called Pharmaxis, which is now manufacturing that product in Australia, exporting it around the world, and that drug is treating patients around the world with lung conditions. Sandra was motivated to bring people together from a lot of different disciplines, make the tiny particles of mannitol, hand fill them into capsules, and work with patients to see if the product worked, and it did. Those three medical research heroes should be household names: Priscilla Kincaid Smith, Marie Smith, Sandra Anderson. You can remember them, you can go and tell people about them, and if we celebrate our heroes of medical research, we can change medical research culture in Australia and get the industry and the health outcomes that we should. $5 billion of investment and the incredible legacy that we have is too good to waste.